Welcome back to Monday Mod Tips. Today I'm going to be doing an overview on the internals of magazine-fed spring-powered blasters. I get a lot of emails and questions and comments about these kinds of blasters that someone has opened up and then doesn't know how to reassemble for whatever reason. They're having trouble with it, it's jamming, some lock isn't working. And so I'm going to go over all of the major components, how they all interact with each other, the major problems that you tend to see with them, and how those can be generally diagnosed and fixed, and then also what parts can be removed and what parts are often removed and what needs to be done in order to remove them when you're upgrading them. So I have here a Recon Mark II, which is a perfectly good example. You're going to see pretty much all the same components, and they will interact in most of the same ways in your Recon Retaliator, Recon Mark II, or any other of the various magazine-fed blasters. The configurations may be different in things like the Raider or the Rampage and the Alpha Troopers. And those also have Slamfire, which is a whole different complicated mechanism, which I will go into in a whole different video. But they will have many of the same components and they will work the same way. They just might be oriented slightly differently. So if you're doing a modification, an upgrade on one of these things, I highly recommend when you first open the blaster up to take some snapshots. If you have a camera or your phone, whatever, take some pictures of the internals in their original configuration so you can figure out how to put it back together when you're done. Most blasters, there are also pictures on the internet of all of the internals, but I recommend taking your own just in case. While you have it open, I also recommend taking out the main spring so that you don't have to worry about that springing and causing problems, and then actually step through priming the blaster and carefully study how all of the various parts interact so you can understand what exactly they do, why they're necessary, and it'll help you understand if something's not working, what part of the blaster would cause that problem. And that's kind of what I'm going to discuss today. So the major areas that we have are the dart door or dart tooth, that assembly up on the front, the lock assembly here in the middle, the catch and trigger assembly back towards the end, and then you have the bolt sled, the plunger tube, and the plunger. And those are kind of all the moving functional areas that you need to worry about. There are a whole bunch of moving parts in these. They are fairly complicated. Some of those moving parts are absolutely necessary, and some aren't, depending on the upgrades that you're doing. Some of the locks can be removed. Some of the other components will be modified or removed. Train? Rude. Alright, so I'm going to step through priming the blaster manually so that you can see how everything interacts. We're going to start by really focusing on the front part. We'll then look at the locks, and then we're going to look at this back portion. Now there is one lock that we need to look at before we can prime it, and that is the bolt sled lock. If that lock is engaged, you can't prime the blaster. The bolt sled will not move. So if you have a blaster like this, and you can pull the trigger and it's not primed, but the bolt sled won't move, you cannot prime the blaster, the slide won't move, you're probably having some sort of an issue with your bolt sled lock. And what the bolt sled lock is at the very back end of the bolt, see how well I can get this on camera, there is this little spring-loaded wedge right here. And that is the bolt sled lock. And when it is locked, the bolt sled won't move. How it is disengaged is, in fact, the plunger. Oops, let's get us back in center. The plunger is what actually disengages it. When the plunger is slid forward, because the plunger can, in fact, move, when the plunger is forward, the notch on the bottom section here disengages that lock, and now our bolt sled will move. Now we should be able to, well, come on, yeah, there we go. Now the bolt sled will move. And when it starts moving, a number of things happen all at the same time. This part here, which is the dart tooth, slides up, and the dart door closes. The dart gate, dart door, people call it different things. But these two things together, and not all blasters have both, some only have one, some use two, some have a different mechanism in general. But there will generally be something up front that blocks the barrel and keeps the dart that is being loaded from just getting pushed out of the barrel. So that door closes, and that way when you slide the bolt forward, it will chamber the dart into this barrel. because it can't go forward because the barrel is blocked. If that is not working, if this door doesn't close or this locking mechanism doesn't slide up and lock it closed, then when you go to load a dart, it either won't load all the way and won't disable the AR, or it'll just get pushed out the front of the blaster. That's the problem that you're generally going to have here, is if this gets dirty or gummed up or something catches, the spring wears out, who knows, any number of things can cause this to stop sliding up like it is supposed to, like it is here. And then your dart door won't lock closed and you won't be able to actually chamber a dart. So make sure that that is clear. You may need to clean it, you may need to lubricate it, you may need to replace the spring. Those are the things that will generally get in the way. If things aren't properly aligned and it can't slide in its slot correctly, those are things to look into and to check. If you're having those problems, if the dart isn't seating all the way or if it's just getting pushed out, this is the section that's having that problem. The second thing that gets engaged, or rather, engaged, when the bolt starts sliding down is this part here. Let's go ahead and move this forward again real quick. This part here that you can vaguely see sliding up and down, that is your trigger lock. And when the bolt starts moving back, it engages the trigger lock, and now you cannot pull the trigger far enough to actually disengage the catch. So there is a little tab that is now catching the front part of the trigger, and now it will not move. And it won't be able to move until you've slid the bolt all the way forward again and disengaged that lock. So if you're having some sort of issue where you can't pull the trigger, even though it's all the way forward, your trigger lock might not be disengaging when you go all the way forward. And again, it could be something where a bit of grit or a bit of dirt or a bit of wood chip, I've seen wood chips get into blasters that'll cause that. Again, something could be misaligned, the spring could be worn out. But if you cannot pull the trigger, then your trigger lock is engaged, and you need to figure out why it isn't disengaging. There's a number of things that can cause that. When the bolt slides back even further, when it gets all the way back, it will finally engage, or rather disengage, this lock. This front thinner lock that you can see moving here is the magazine release lock. And until the bolt is all the way back, it is engaged. Once it gets all the way back, this little notch here on the bolt sled engages or disengages the lock, and now you can operate the mag release and you can then take the magazine out. Again, if the mag release never unlocks, then this may be misaligned, like that. See, now even though the bolt is all the way back, it won't disengage because it's out of line. You shouldn't be able to close the shell if that is the case, but you never know. Again, there's a number of things that could be causing that. So that is what then allows you to take the magazine out. And the reason that that lock exists is taking the magazine in and out when the bolt is forward can cause problems, because the lips on the top of the magazine would have to be forced around this, which can either break your magazine, or it will jam it on either side of the blaster, or it can cause the bolt to get misaligned, and then it won't properly slide and won't disengage and all of that. So that is why that lock exists, and it is a useful lock. That one I recommend leaving in if possible. It's not always possible. We'll get to that. Now, with it all the way back, the plunger rod, the plunger has now been forced far enough back to actually engage the catch. It also locks the plunger tube back, because there's a lip on the back of the plunger tube that prevents you from being able to pull the plunger out. So when that gets pulled all the way back, it actually also pulls the plunger tube back, and that is what is then going to cause the bolt sled lock to engage when you slide it back forward. Now when it's in this back position, the trigger is locked, so you can't pull the trigger, which is good because you wouldn't want the spring to slam the whole bolt closed, because that's not good for the blaster. And it also wouldn't fire properly because the plunger would be moving forward at the same time and there wouldn't actually be any air being compressed. So that's why the trigger lock exists, to prevent you from pulling the trigger while the spring is under compression but the blaster isn't actually primed, or fully primed. So the trigger can't be pulled, the mag lock can be released, and the plunger is being held forward. Now when we cycle forward again, and get all the way forward, and everything locks into place, there we go. Now the bolt sled lock engages because the plunger tube is far enough back that that tab on the bottom is not properly disengaging the bolt sled lock. The downside to that, the good thing is that means that if the blaster is loaded and primed, you cannot reprime the blaster, which would double load and cause problems because you'd already have a dart in the barrel and then you'd be trying to force another dart into the barrel. While the dart door is closed, you'd end up mangling the dart, things would get jammed, and it's bad. So you don't want to double load a blaster, and so you cannot prime it again until you've actually fired it and cleared the barrel. The downside is that means that you cannot prime the blaster. Between having that lock and the trigger lock means you cannot then reprime the blaster, pull the trigger, and allow the bolt to slide forward. So you cannot deprime your blaster when both of those if either of those locks are still in place. If you want to be able to deprime your blaster, which is good if you've upgraded it and you want to be able to not fire it when it's not loaded, like when you get to the last round or what have you, there are reasons you might want to deprime the blaster gently rather than firing it. Both the bolt sled lock and the trigger lock will need to be removed. Now, a lot of upgraded bolts, the fancy metal ones that exist, many times will not even have that lock. Some of them you could transfer the lock from this to that, others don't have that option at all. A lot of them also don't actually have the notches and the wedges necessary to disengage either of these locks. And so if you upgrade your bolt sled, you may have to take these out as well. Some have them, some don't. It depends on the brand of upgraded bolt sled that you've gotten. If possible, I recommend leaving the magazine release lock in place, but if you're going to be upgrading your blaster, you really should remove the bolt sled lock and the trigger lock so that you can deprime the blaster if necessary. Finally, once it's all the way primed and everything is back in place, now your trigger lock has been disengaged, your mag release lock is re-engaged, and now when you pull the trigger, it will interact, it'll go far enough back to release the catch, and your plunger will move forward, which will also then move your plunger forward again, or the plunger tube forward again, disengaging your bolt sled lock, and now you can prime the whole thing again, as long as that's being forced forward. And now the whole thing can cycle again. So, that pretty much covers it. If the blaster is having certain issues, like if it won't catch, when you prime it, if it doesn't catch, there's something wrong with the catch area. You may have the catch in upside down. Some of them, the spring is offset, so there really is only one way to put it in. But it does matter, because one side is beveled, it has an angle, so that it will get forced up when when the plunger comes back. And the other side is flat so that it'll catch. If you put it in upside down, because it's beveled, it won't actually catch and it'll just slip and it won't ever actually catch and your blaster will not properly function. So if your blaster isn't catching, make sure the catch is in the right way. Another thing to make sure is that your plunger is in the right side up. If you look at the plunger, there are two notches, one on the back and one on the front. Those need to be pointing down. If you put the plunger tube in upside down, that notch will not disengage your bolt sled and you will never be able to prime the blaster. So your plunger does have to be in the right way. Now, some expanded plungers, like the ones for the Prophecy, it's taking advantage of the fact that there's a little bit of a gap right here, which allows you to put in a slightly larger plunger. But that plunger probably doesn't have that bolt sled lock release tab, and so you'll need to remove the bolt sled lock in most cases. Especially since if you're putting in an expanded plunger tube, you've probably done other upgrades, you've probably replaced the bolt sled, or you probably should, because you're going with a heavier spring, and you're going to want to be able to deprime the blaster, so you're going to want to take that and the trigger lock out anyway. I think I have covered it all at that point. If your trigger is not releasing, it's your trigger catch. If the magazine can't be released, it's probably your magazine lock. If the darts aren't properly chambering, it's probably your dart tooth area. And if you're not being able to catch, it's something wrong with the catch mechanism. It might be upside down. You might have the bolt or the plunger in upside down or the wrong way. But that is how everything interacts. So when you're upgrading, those are the two locks that you're going to want to remove, the bolt sled lock and the trigger lock. The dart door area will generally get removed when you go to a sealed breach, in which case those will no longer be a problem. They will get removed entirely. If you're going to a full sealed breech kit, those come out and don't need to be used at all. Generally, you'll have a different front end for this anyway, which won't have that as an option, so that you won't need to worry about. But if you are still going with a regular breech, these absolutely have to function, as does the catch and the release. The locking mechanisms can be removed if you don't want them, but the other ones are in fact vital. So there you have it. Hopefully this will, if you've watched this, this will give you some idea of how all these parts are interacting, what parts need to be in what position, what they do, why they're necessary, how they operate, how they interact with each other, and hopefully it'll help some of you reassemble your blasters or be able to upgrade them a little bit more efficiently when you know what parts you can get rid of and what parts you can't get rid of, and if something isn't working or you're lacking a feature you want to be able to deprime and you can't. Now you know what parts to remove in order to do that. If you're having various problems with various parts, you know where to look, what area is causing that problem, and hopefully this will help some of you. So, thank you for watching.